Okay, so our final presenter this afternoon is Kristen Schuster. Kristen is a second-year doctoral student in the School of Information Science and Learning Technologies at the University of Missouri-Columbia, and she is 2 classes away from finishing her coursework. She completed her master's degree in library and information science with an emphasis on archives management at Simmons College in 2012. Currently, her research areas focus on American library history and information management, and both areas have framed her interest in the digital humanities. For the past year and a half, she has been working with Dr. Noah Herringman and Dr. Ann Myers in the English department at the University of Missouri-Columbia to produce a digital edition of Vetusta Monumenta.
You said it correctly. It took me months to figure out how to say it. Okay, hold on while I stick the microphone into a pocket so that I can wave my hands around as I'm talking to you. So yes, I'm a second-year doctoral student, which means that I actually have a research plan and agenda in place now, but I won't bore you with that. I can talk about the exciting project that I'm working on. So some background, there is an original printed edition of Vetusta Monumenta. It's a series of 7 volumes of a plate book that was first published in 1747 by the Society of Antiquarians in London. And then the last volume was published in 1906. And the society was founded many years before they actually started publishing things in 1718 by a group of scholars and artists based in London. And they have a particular, had and still do have a particular emphasis on British cultural history and heritage. And the society still exists. They have a museum, archive, and library in London, so if you're ever there, you should go visit. They are lovely people. And the digital edition of Vetusta Monumenta is in the process of pairing commentary with high-resolution scans of these plates. And the commentary is peer-reviewed, and my job is to provide accurate and well-curated metadata for textual and graphic materials so that we can build an innovative search interface that links texts and images and across multiple pages and instances of these objects. So it is an interdisciplinary and collaborative effort, and I've listed everyone that I could think of. I'm sure that there are more floating around out there, but the scholarly commentary is being provided by Dr. Noah Herringman and Dr. Ann Myers, who are in the English department at my university. And then they have 2 further collaborators who are at their own respective institutions, and they have expertise in medieval history and then also in modern English history and literature. And then there are also technical contributors who work in the division of, technical services in the library, and Felicity Dykes has been kind enough to oversee the scanning of all of these plates. I work with a series of master's students in my department to do quality control and metadata development. And then that last point, the division of IT actually just changed. We have server space through the Division of Arts and Sciences now, so they provide technical support in installing things for us and making sure that we're not breaking anything important. And so then there's even more support coming through all of this. Dr. Twyla Gibson, who's also in my department, has a Digital Humanities Commons where I can go and other faculty can go and discuss problems that they're having, interests that they have, and kind of develop a resource sharing network. Then there's the Society of Antiquaries in London, who are providing peer review and then access to objects that they have in their museum and then publications that they have in their archives. And then Special Collections at MU actually houses 7 volumes of Vetusta Monumenta. And I have 2 other people that deserve recognition for this. There's a lovely gentleman named Brian Kane in technical services at Ellis Library, who patiently sat through me troubleshooting a whole bunch of digital asset management tools and database frameworks, and then helped me discover, or actually he discovered Scalar and introduced me to it. And then I have a colleague who works at the Worcester Art Museum in Massachusetts, who specializes in digital preservation and curation, who has helped me develop best policies and practices for actually making sure things stick around for longer than I'll be around, on this project at least. And so there's also been a really wonderful opportunity between all of these various kinds of moving parts and people to not only share resources, but to have multiple points of view kind of informing us and helping us troubleshoot technical problems and then also scholarly problems, because antiquarians were a complex bunch of people, and I'm still not entirely sure what they do, but it is interesting. So then the project has kind of evolved, for me at least, and one of the first questions when I sat down to meet with Dr. Herringman and Dr. Myers, they wanted to define what a digital edition was and how it was different than a digital library. And I'm like, there's a difference? Yes, there is a difference. And so I started thinking of it in library science terms, since I am a librarian. And the research and collaboration has produced a new manifestation of this item. So instead of scanning the images, making a MARC record, and making them available through Ellis Library, we've worked to create an interactive framework that is not wholly unique and re-envisioning Vetusta Monumenta, but representing it in a digital framework and context. And so I love FRBR, functional requirements for bibliographic records, but I've learned that not everyone is as enthusiastic about it as me. And the last time I gave a talk, it was to a room of people who were not librarians, and that was awkward. So, but I think of this as a manifestation because it's taking the work and then the original expression of that work and creating something that is representing it in a new context. I'm going to sound kind of repetitive by the end of it, but it is something that I think is very exciting. And so the way that this has kind of been technically fleshed out by Dr. Herringman and Dr. Myers is that the Society of Antiquarians produced Vetusta Monumenta through the selection and curation of particular objects, people, events, and places. And the digital edition is seeking to explore, examine, and understand this process. And it's also seeking to capture and represent this process in an interactive manner. And I'll be demonstrating that interactive manner at the end. So the commentary written about the prints examines the provenance, condition, and understanding of the prints in Vetusta Monumenta and in order to understand how the Society of Antiquaries created and used these prints and also thought about the objects that these prints represent. And so the goal is to situate scholarship about antiquarians and by antiquarians, because antiquarians loved publishing things and exchanging letters, and to really put it into an interdisciplinary context so that art historians, English professors, and then also library scientists can really leverage it into a kind of interrogation of what it means to digitize and create metadata for these objects. So the project I've kind of started thinking about it in terms of scholarly goals and then technical goals. And the scholarly goals are, I am not an antiquarian or a professor of English, so Dr. Herringman and Dr. Myers have been responsible for this. And they're creating commentary for each of the plates in Vetusta Monumenta. And so far, in Volume 1, there's 70 plates. We have commentary for 5 of them because commentary takes a good long while to write. But each commentary has a transcription of any text that is on the print, and it's usually in Latin or some kind of recreation of Latin, and then a translation of that text so that people like me can read it, and then a summary of the plate, so mostly like a paragraph saying it is this ancient ruin from this location, and then a history of the plates, so who discovered and collected it, because antiquarians were very famous for being like, I like that, I will take it with me, and then saying who the artist was, how long it took them to do that, and then when it was published in whichever volume of Vetusta Monumenta it showed up in. And then the object's provenance, since these plates are depicting objects of British cultural and national heritage. And then scholarly commentary synthesizes each of those components. And so they are very careful to make a distinction between the plate and then the object that it is representing, which really affected the way that I approached cataloging and providing metadata for these things. And I think it's the most exciting part of the project, but that's because I'm a librarian. So the technical goals for the project have really focused on long-term digital access to the digital edition. And that was something that I, again, depended on colleagues for help with, since digital curation is not my forte, but I do appreciate it. And then implementing effective relationships between images and text, which is what I am very interested in and I would like to think very good at doing. So the next few slides will be talking about this and hopefully not boring you to death. So I will start by going over digital curation. And this is the digital curation lifecycle model that was developed by the Joint Information Systems Committee, or JISC, in the UK. And so each of these circles kind of creates this iterative process for making sure you keep track of things and you know where they are, who's using them, how they're being used, and how you're updating them or making sure they're not kind of falling apart and disappearing. So in the first circle, I start with create or receive, and that was when I first started with the project. I ended up spending a lot of time with Felicity Dykes in Ellis Library, getting a hold of the 600 PPI TIFF scans that she had created for us. So these big, beautiful files. But because TIFFs are not for the internet, the next step was to appraise and select these. And they were transformed, well, the files were copied and then transformed into JPEGs that are 350 PPI files. And then they were ingested into my computer, as well as an external hard drive and then a server. So I ascribe to the lots of copies keep stuff safe, especially when you document where those lots of copies are. And then the preservation action was writing down where things were, who can use them, what format they're going to be in, and then determining the kind of fidelity of the storage systems that we had established. And then the access and reuse was really writing policies of who can touch the files and then who can use the files. And then in the second circle, the yellow circle, it looks a lot easier with the curate and preserve, but that was really where we had to sit down and start making decisions about how we were going to implement the preservation practices into a curation of this data so that we could use it. And that was when Sarah Gillis, very patient woman that she is, sat down and started reviewing policies, best practices, and procedures, and I wrote a document. And I had to translate it from library speak into humanities speak so that my bosses could follow along and actually understand what was going on and really kind of make good use of it so that we had workflows set up. And then in the blue circles, with the community watch and participation and the preservation and planning, it was really testing these things and making sure that they were sustainable, because what good is digital preservation if you can't actually carry it out on the budget and the resources that you have? And then the fifth circle, and the final one, is the description and representation of information. And that's when we selected our digital asset management system and all of the software that we would be using to actualize these processes. So once that was in place, I got to start cataloging things. Best day ever. Sorry, I'm really, really enthusiastic about cataloging. So my background is in image cataloging, and I specialize in using VRA Core, which is a metadata schema developed by the Visual Resource Association. And then they have a content standard. It should say cataloging cultural objects, not object, because there are multiple objects in most cultures. And so this is a really great way of distinguishing between iterations of an object. So you can have the physical object that's sitting in a museum or in a field, if it's something like Stonehenge or an abbey that's slowly moldering away in the British countryside. And then the image that you have of it, say it's a painting, and then the digital surrogate, which would be the file that I'm directly working with. So you have control over how these are described, what kinds of technical, descriptive, administrative metadata is associated with each, and then you can link those pieces together into a comprehensive and human-readable format. And cataloging cultural objects gives you a really clear-cut framework for doing that. It was developed by the Visual Resource Association and is available through the Getty. And so then, because VRA Core is a very highly specialized and technical metadata schema, it doesn't really search well through things like Google. So I have used the Getty metadata standards crosswalk to create a system for translating VRA into Dublin Core. I don't have an automatic kind of crosswalk setup because I'm very particular about how Dublin Core is used. And so this has allowed me to create a system for evaluating the textual commentaries that Dr. Herringman and Dr. Myers are creating and thinking about how I am going to relate the images to it once we have put them online into the framework that we've created for representing them there in the digital edition. And so once all of that has happened, and it's a slow but kind of very interesting process, I learned all kinds of fun facts about Great Britain in the 18th century. We put these things into the Internet Archive, and for preservation purposes, and then also for access purposes, and attach a Critical Commons license to it so that people know their kinds of use permissions, etc., and that we feel more in control of the internet. And then we link these into the system that we have selected for hosting our digital edition, which is called Scalar. And I will be going into that in the next slide. So, putting that all together before I walk you through kind of the visual representation of this, we have a freely accessible scholarly resource. Once we have kind of released it into the wild, we're still going through some of the technical processes and iterations of it, and there's still more commentary on the way. But theoretically, within the next year, it will be freely accessible, and it will be accessible forever, because we've put into place all of these steps and practices that allow us to collaborate, communicate, share goals and ideas, and have a way of versioning things without losing sight of what's going on. And then that means that we have also created a framework for creating understandable relationships between pages, objects, and comments in the digital edition. And we do that through Scalar, which is a digital publishing tool created at USC and funded by Steven Spielberg, so they have more money than they know what to do with, which is good news for me. And Scalar provides tools for creating relationships between graphic media and textual media. So you're not just going to rely on your search box. You're going to have meaningful relationships that you form through a set of tools to link images to text and text to images within and across pages in your digital published material. And Scalar, because they promote the use of high-quality images and media, doesn't require you upload things into its system, which is why we're using the Internet Archive, because the Internet Archive gives you a permanent link to this content, and then you feed that into Scalar, and magically, because I'm not a programmer, it pops up if you supply the correct metadata to identify and create these associations. So I will now be walking you through all of that. That is the mouse. How do I get out of here? And then there is internet. Sorry, you'll have to bear with me for a moment. That mouse is really touchy. Okay. Okay. So we start off with the introduction page so that you actually know where you wound up. But so when you go through the introduction, you can really see how Scalar is able to display content. So as you're reading along and you're like, oh, plate 1, what is that? You can click on it and it will highlight it. And then if you're intrigued, you can go and see the high quality image that's there. You can see, and this one hasn't had a whole bunch of bells and whistles attached to it, but if this media annotates other media, they'll display along this panel here. The metadata that you supply should show up, but because sometimes the internet doesn't cooperate, it might not. It'll also show you the permalink to the Internet Archive so that you can investigate further and evaluate what's going on. And then if you want to see it in even more detail, you can zoom in onto various features of it. And so the other option that you have as you're reading through these things, and it kind of goes on. So it really requires that you do read through the text, but you can also search through the images. So here, if you look, you can see with the annotations, you can see other images that comment on it or the comments that it provides for those other images. And so as you're reading through the text, you really do have a way to interact with the graphic materials that are there. But the fun part for me is the fact that Scalar uses Resource Description Framework, or RDF, to create these logical associations, but then they also make it searchable. So it displays the index of content that you make, and it will, when you hover over, you'll see the network of associations that you're making, which I feel not only makes it interesting for users who are trying to see, like, oh, Henry VIII, didn't he have like 9 wives or something? But you can also see that he contributed, not as many as 9, I don't think he lived long enough for that. But as you scroll down, you can verify kind of the paths that you're taking and the content that you're exploring, so that you have a way of visualizing the data that you've very carefully curated. And that, for me, gives an added opportunity to edit and revise the metadata that I'm providing. And so there are multiple views for that. This is not the searchable one, because that is kind of terrifying if you just like land on a page and accidentally click on something and jump along. But here, if you see that it's the same content displayed differently, but if you click on it, then you're able to go to the media that it has provided. So you're not relying on a search box. You're really kind of able to explore the content and context that is being shown to you. But one of the other things is that you're able to represent this data in the form of a book. So you're able to maintain that kind of quality of leafing through a volume of Vetusta Monumenta, but you're also able to kind of jump around. So when you click on Begin This Path, it's like starting a chapter in a book. And here we are again with the Lamp of Knowledge, which has the transcription, translation, plate, object, provenance. And since this is an object that's owned by the Society of Antiquaries in London, you're able to go to their, I don't actually know how to use an antiquarian search interface. They have archaeological data that they associate with it. But you can go and look into their database. And Scalar is actually a highly user-friendly system. So if I wanted to make changes to this, you have a really nice kind of HTML layout for this. And as you go along the top here, you can see that you can add references from the content that you've loaded into it, content that you haven't loaded into Scalar, so it would be an external link. And then you can add annotations and comments to these things. So if you have something really exciting that you want to say about engraved by an unknown hand, you can create a comment that will kind of expand on that without kind of, it's basically like a footnote, I would say. And then again, external links and internal links. You can choose how you're going to emphasize the media, if you want to put preference on text, or if you want to put emphasis on the images. You can create relationships between these things, which is where the RDF comes into play. And then you can make comments, you can also make annotations, and you can make tags. And the tags still trip me up because they're something that I'm not used to, since I usually sit in front of a database and I'm very careful about adding metadata according to particular content standard rules. But if you're feeling really adventurous, you can add CSS and JavaScript, and then you can augment even more metadata, which I try not to do since I go through so many kind of iterative processes with metadata anyway. But if push comes to shove and somebody does feel the urge to do this, they would have to let me know so that I could update everything else in the other places that it exists, but that would be possible. And the only reason I don't cringe at this is because you don't have to invent the elements yourself. It provides the drop-down list for you. And so from the even further back end of all of this, if you go to the editing dashboard, you can see that it sets out a really clear set of administrative tools for you to use. So you have the pages that you've created, you have the media that you can upload, and it has a number of partnerships with different repositories that you can either contribute to or mine data or objects from. And then you can see the paths or chapters that you've created, as well as the tags. So it gives you a set of graphic kinds of representations of the practices and processes that you're implementing to create relationships between content. And that, I think, is very useful, because then you're not kind of running around feeling overwhelmed, you can break things down very carefully and methodically and work with them effectively. And so again, with the annotations, you can see what's going on. And then the comments, there is a form for users to provide comments, but then the publisher can provide comments. So you can make an image a comment on a phrase or portion of text so that when you click on it, this beautiful image shows up so that you don't have to like flip to the end of a book or kind of like scroll 6 pages ahead. It's right there kind of at your fingertips to look at. So yes, that is the end. If there are questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm enthusiastic.
Any questions?
So you're doing 3 volumes.
Yes.
And it's taking you?
So it's taken about a year to work through kind of the technical processes, the workflows for the scholarly contributions, and since everybody, I mean, I think it's even once you have tenure, that like dream of being able to like take a break, it's a lie. They have full course loads, they have other research projects that they're working on, so it's a slow process, but I can't complain since it's given me time to actually have some form of authority of what I'm talking about.
No, I think it's wonderful. I'm just wondering how there are many other volumes and...
Yeah. So the next step, volumes 2 and volumes 3 have more text. So my bosses are pushing for TEI, which will be an adventure, since I do specialize in image management and curation.
I have 2 questions. One is, did you have a role in picking the technology? And the other is, when you showed that expanded image, was that residing in the Internet Archive or somewhere else?
It was in the Internet Archive.
Okay.
Yeah. So we are slowly but surely getting server space for this project. It's been, because people, and I don't know how it is at other universities, but at MU, people kind of guard and hoard server space because there are so many faculty, because there are so many research projects going on, that it's not an uphill battle, but it is like kind of a bureaucratic negotiation. And I did have a hand in choosing the technology for this. I was originally hired just to catalog the images, but then I sat down with Dr. Herringman and Dr. Meyer when I was halfway through volume 1, and they're like, well, we actually need something to like put this in. How do you feel about web design? And I was like, but I can find tools that will help me do web design. So that's how I ended up getting in touch with Brian Kane and sitting down and kind of cringing at the thought of using Fedora, since it is so text friendly, but it doesn't deal well with images. And my bosses were like, yeah, it is text friendly, because Ellis Library has an iteration of Fedora that they're using for their digital libraries, but they really wanted to showcase the relationship between text and image. And without me going crazy and quitting, or them just kind of throwing up their hands and also quitting. So that's how we came to determine to use Scalar, which is freely accessible as well, which is also great. I should have mentioned that.
One more question.
Hi, thanks. That was great. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the life cycle of a digital edition? Does this have an end of life? I sort of picture a spinning plate and then starting up another spinning plate and starting up another spinning plate.
Yeah, I'm avoiding the spinning plates. So Dr. Herringman and Dr. Meyer envision there being the 3 volumes, but because they're working through the commentaries in a very systematic manner, it's kind of, it's more like a sit and spin, where you like sit down and I like the spinning metaphor. So you sit down and you work really hard on that first volume for however long it takes, but that way you have this kind of high quality content to go with, textual comment to go with high quality image content. So they don't really have an end date on it. They're looking at fostering relationships within my department, and then in the art history department, and then in the classics department, so that they can really have as many people as possible kind of contributing to this process, so that maybe it speeds up, or maybe the content just becomes richer. But we're not kind of juggling all 3 volumes at once. It's definitely like a concerted and very like deep exploration of volume 1 at this moment in time. So,
All right, thank you, Kristen.
thank you.
And we've reached the end of our day. So I just have a couple of comments very quickly. It's been a wonderful and very informative day. I hope you feel the same way. On behalf of the symposium organizers and the staff of the John Crerar Library, I'd like to thank all the speakers for all that they've done today, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming. We're so pleased that you were able to join us today. And my thanks to Deb and to Elizabeth for all that they've done as well. Just a reminder, if you are interested in a tour Mansueto, could I just see a show of hands so I have an idea of how many? Okay. We'll meet in the atrium at 4:45. So thank you, everyone, for those who traveled, safe travels home, and thank you again for being with us. The evaluation forms you can either just fold and leave on your chair, and we'll pick them up. Thank you.